There was no clear moment when I realized something had shifted. No one I could point to and say, this is where it changed. It was more like discovering that a sound I had grown used to was no longer there. Not silence, but the absence of a constant background noise I hadn't known how to name. Mornings arrived without resistance. I woke before the alarm, not alert, not tired, just present. The room held its familiar shape, the ceiling faintly discolored near the corner, the curtains moving slightly with air from a window that was never fully closed, the chair by the wall with clothes folded in a way that suggested intention without commitment. I stayed in bed longer than necessary, not to avoid the day, but to observe how consciousness returned. Thoughts appeared slowly, like figures emerging from fog. Sensations came first. The weight of the blanket, the pressure beneath my shoulder, the quiet pulse in my wrists. Meaning came later, if at all. Outside, the city was already awake. Not loud, not demanding, just operational. I listened without trying to identify sources. Sound arrived as texture rather than information. Movement existed without narrative. Coffee tasted the same as it always had, which surprised me. I had half expected it to change, to feel different now that my attention had shifted. But it didn't. Bitterness, warmth, weight. Familiar. Reliable. I noticed that I was relieved by this. Some consistencies, I realized, do not need to be re-examined. I stood by the window and watched people pass below, not individually, as motion, a pattern of pauses and accelerations. A brief, clustering near the corner where the light took longer to change. A subtle hesitation in the crowd that repeated itself every few minutes. No one appeared aware of it. I wondered how many years I had moved like that, responding, adjusting, stopping, continuing, without noticing the shape of it. Walking had become quieter in a way that had nothing to do with sound. My steps landed softly, not because I tried to make them so, but because my body no longer rushed ahead of itself. I let my pace find its own rhythm. When it changed, I noticed. When it didn't, I noticed that too. I passed the same streets I always had, but they felt less crowded with interpretation. Buildings were surfaces again, not symbols. Cracks in the sidewalk were just cracks. Shadows were simply the absence of light, not reminders of anything else. This was not emptiness. It was precision. Memory still appeared, but differently now. It no longer announced itself. There were no emotional spikes, no sudden pulls backward. Instead, memories arrived like afterimages, faint, delayed, easy to miss. A certain angle of glass reminded me of a place I used to wait. A sound echoed something I couldn't quite place. The feeling passed before I could decide whether to follow it. I didn't. That too felt new. The pressure in my chest remained. It had not loosened. If anything, it had become more defined, like a boundary rather than a weight. It didn't push. It held. I could sense its edges now. Its consistency. I began to understand that this pressure was not something I was meant to overcome. It was something I was meant to carry, not heroically, not with effort, but naturally like posture. There were moments during the day when I forgot myself entirely. Not dissociation, something gentler. I would be mid-step, mid-breath, mid-observation, and there would be no commentary. No internal voice noting the fact of being present. Just presence. When awareness returned, it did so quietly, without judgment. I sat on a bench in a small park I had passed hundreds of times without stopping. The bench was cold. The wood slightly splintered near one end. I placed my hands on my thighs and let them rest there. Children ran past somewhere behind me. A dog barked, then stopped. Time stretched without becoming heavy. I realized then that I had spent a long portion of my life trying to confirm my own existence through attention, by watching myself feel, think, endure. Now, existence seemed less interested in being confirmed. It simply continued. That evening, I did not write. The notebook stayed closed on the table. I noticed it there, but did not reach for it. This felt neither like discipline nor neglect, just choice without emphasis. The room filled with dusk gradually. Light shifted along the walls. Colors softened. I observed it the way one observes breathing, without needing to control the pace. Later, Lying in bed, I waited for thoughts to return the way they usually did. They didn't arrive all at once. When they came, they were sparse, practical, uninsistent. No questions, no conclusions. Sleep did not feel like escape. It felt like continuity. As I drifted, I noticed one last thing, the quiet confidence of my own awareness. Not loud, not proud, just steady, capable of holding whatever came next without asking it to justify itself. And that was enough for now. It did not take long for the world to respond. Not dramatically, not with resistance, but with quiet insistence. The kind that does not interrupt, but accumulates. I noticed it first in routine. The same actions, repeated daily, began to feel slightly misaligned. Not wrong, not uncomfortable, just incomplete, as if they belonged to a version of me that no longer required them in the same way. I stood in the kitchen one morning, coffee already poured, spoon resting in the cup, and realized I had no idea what I was waiting for. The habit remained, but the intention behind it had dissolved. I stirred anyway. The sound was familiar, circular, predictable. I watched my hand do it. This awareness did not disrupt the moment. It simply sat alongside it, neutral, observant. I understood then that presence does not erase habit. It only reveals it. Outside, the city moved with its usual confidence. Schedules held. Signals changed. People adjusted without noticing they were adjusting. I joined them, but with a slight delay. Not in movement, but in identification. I was participating without being absorbed. Walking felt more exposed now. Not because anything external had changed, but because there was less internal noise to buffer sensation. Every contact, foot to ground, air against skin, fabric shifting, arrived directly. There was no interpretation layered over it. At first, this clarity felt clean. Then it began to feel demanding. Not urgent, demanding. The pressure in my chest responded. It grew marginally firmer, as if acknowledging the increased load. I did not resist it. I adjusted my posture instead, letting my shoulders drop slightly, allowing my breath to settle lower. The adjustment worked, but only partially. I realized then that this state of quiet presence was not static. It required maintenance, not through effort, but through honesty. The moment I tried to preserve it, it began to tighten. That afternoon, I encountered someone I used to know. Not well, not deeply, enough to exchange greetings without explanation. We stood facing each other on the sidewalk, the city flowing around us, and spoke for less than 2 minutes. The conversation was ordinary. Weather, time, a vague mention of work. What unsettled me was not what was said, but how little of myself moved in response. My expressions appeared on time. My voice carried the appropriate tone. But internally, there was distance, not detachment, not coldness, just space. I noticed the moment their eyes searched mine for recognition. I gave it, not consciously, automatically. After we parted, I continued walking, but something lingered. Not guilt, not regret, a question without language. Later, sitting alone, I examined the feeling more closely. It was not absence of connection. It was the absence of friction. The interaction had passed through me without resistance, without imprint. I wondered whether this was what ease looked like, or whether it was something else entirely. That evening, I opened the notebook again, not to analyze, just to see what would happen. The page remained empty longer than expected. My hand hovered. Words felt optional. Eventually, I wrote a single sentence, then stopped. I did not reread it. Sleep came easily, but lightly. I woke several times, each time fully aware of where I was, who I was, without the usual moment of reorientation. Consciousness felt continuous, like a line that never fully broke. In one of these awakenings, I noticed the pressure in my chest more distinctly than ever before. It was no longer just a sensation. It was a signal, not of danger, but of capacity, like a muscle being asked to hold more than it was used to. The next day unfolded quietly, too quietly. The absence of internal commentary, once a relief, now felt ambiguous. Without narrative, time lost some of its texture. Hours passed cleanly, efficiently, but left little trace. I began to understand that meaning had not disappeared. It had simply stopped announcing itself. This was unsettling in a way I hadn't anticipated. I sat in a cafe and watched people come and go. I noticed the repetition of gestures, the efficiency of movement, the small rituals repeated across strangers. None of it bored me. None of it stirred anything either. I asked myself, without urgency, whether this neutrality was sustainable. The question did not demand an answer. Later, while walking home, I felt a brief surge of something unfamiliar. Not emotion, not memory, resistance. It lasted only a moment. A tightening in the chest, a subtle urge to withdraw attention, to soften focus, to blur edges. I did not act on it. I simply noticed it. That too passed. I understood then that this state, this clarity, this reduced noise was not a destination. It was an exposure. Without distraction, even subtle discomfort became visible. Without interpretation, even minor resistance stood out. Presence was not peace. It was contact. That night, I sat in the dark longer than usual. No light, no writing, just awareness occupying space. The city sounded farther away. My breath felt louder. I wondered, not anxiously, whether this was the point where people usually turn back. Added noise, added explanation, added structure. I did not. Instead, I stayed. The pressure remained. Awareness remained. The absence of narrative remained. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something else emerged. Not emotion, not meaning, but readiness. Not readiness for action. Readiness for whatever came without needing to prepare for it. I went to bed without conclusion, without reassurance, without resolution, and slept. There was no final moment. No scene that felt conclusive enough to mark an ending. What change did so without announcement, like light shifting in a room while you're still inside it. I noticed it over several days, maybe longer. Time had begun to lose its edges. Mornings no longer felt like beginnings. Evenings no longer like closures. They were simply different textures of the same, continuous state. I woke one day with the familiar pressure already present. Not heavier, not lighter. Stable. Almost neutral. It no longer drew my attention automatically. I had to look for it to find it. And even then it felt less like something happening to me and more like something happening with me. The city moved as it always had. I moved with it. But the subtle readiness I had felt earlier had settled into something quieter. Not expectation. Not vigilance. Alignment. I realized that I was no longer scanning experience for signals. No longer checking whether something felt right, meaningful, or necessary. Experience arrived, and I allowed it to arrive fully, without categorizing it. This was not attachment. It was intimacy without ownership. I sat at my desk one afternoon, sunlight cutting across the surface at an angle I had never noticed before. Dust particles hovered in the air, visible only because the light caught them just right. I watched them move slowly, unpredictably, each following a path that made sense only in motion. I understood then that I had spent much of my life trying to stabilize things that were never meant to be still. Thoughts came and went. Sensations followed. Even emotion appeared briefly, muted, unremarkable, but real. None of it asked for response. None of it needed to be held. The notebook remained nearby. I opened it, not with intention, but curiosity. I flipped through pages filled weeks ago, months ago. The handwriting looked familiar but distant, like something written by someone I once knew well, but no longer lived inside. I did not judge it. I closed the notebook again. Later, while walking, I noticed how often people looked past one another, how rarely attention landed fully on what was in front of it. I wondered, not critically, how often I had done the same, even when I thought I was paying attention. Now, attention felt different, less directional, less effortful. It did not lock onto objects. It rested within the field itself. I realized that nothing was missing. This realization did not bring relief. It brought steadiness. There were moments, small, fleeting, when the old impulse returned. The desire to frame experience, to explain it, to turn it into something communicable. Each time, the impulse faded on its own, like a reflex that no longer found a purpose. I did not suppress it. I let it dissolve. One evening, I stood at the window again, watching the city below. The same intersection, the same rhythm. People stopping, starting, adjusting. I felt no separation from it this time. Not identification either. Just coexistence. The pressure in my chest softened slightly. Not because it was released, but because it no longer needed to hold so tightly. It had learned that nothing was about to overwhelm it. I breathed more deeply than usual, without trying. Sleep that night felt complete. Not heavy. Not deep. Complete. Like awareness folding into itself without resistance. In the morning, I woke without thought. Consciousness was already there, already open. No assessment followed. No check-in. Just continuity. I understood then that this was not a state to maintain. It was a way of not interfering. Life did not become easier. It became simpler. Tasks still required effort. Interactions still required presence. Uncertainty remained. But none of it carried the extra weight of interpretation. Things happened, and I responded as needed, nothing more. I stopped waiting for something else to begin. There was no sense of arrival, no internal declaration, just the quiet recognition that I was no longer standing outside my own life, observing it from a distance. I was inside it now, not immersed, not lost, but undeniably here. And that was not profound. It was sufficient.